Welcome to On the Economy. Today I feel especially fortunate to have a discussion with my close friend for many years, Larry Mishel. Much of what you read on the economy is stuff that I learned from Larry over the years working on issues of labor economics and really political economy. I think Larry's scope, as you'll see, goes well beyond noodling on the economic numbers. I particularly wanted to get Larry in to talk about a new paper he wrote called The Wedges Between Productivity and Median Compensation Growth. Larry, tell us about this wedge between productivity growth, median compensation, what it is and why it's important.
Okay. Well, we're often told that productivity is a source of our ability to increase living standards. And productivity has been going up each year. Productivity is the growth of output of goods and services per hour worked. So it's basically how the pie grows. It's how much the economy can distribute to people. It turns out, as we show in a key graph, figure 1, which shows the growth of productivity between 1948 and 2011. And the key part of the graph is that in the first part of the period up through the mid-70s, productivity grows, and then the hourly compensation of a typical worker, grows in tandem. Mm-hmm. Thereafter, however, it diverges. And so it really tells us a few different things. One is that productivity growth actually provides the potential for raising the living standards of the typical working family. It doesn't actually guarantee it. And that the divergence between pay and productivity has been going on for many decades. Our research shows that the divergence has never been greater than it has been over the last 10, 11 years.
Okay, so let's stop and focus on the two findings you've just mentioned. One is the extent of the divergence, and the other is this keyword potential. Now, when I studied economics, I learned that the living standards of American households is a function of productivity growth. As productivity increases, it kind of makes sense that if you can make the same amount of output with fewer hours or more goods and services per hour worked, basically, which is what we're talking about here, people can be better off. Living standards can rise. But then you introduce this idea of potential. So that connection is by no means automatic, and it has diverged. Say a little bit more about that.
Well,
I mean, link this to the inequality discussion is partly what I'm saying.
Well, the key thing to wrap your head around, OT ears, is that productivity since 1973 has grown over 80%. But the hourly compensation, all wages and benefits per hour worked, of the median worker, the worker in the middle of the distribution, half make more, half make less. So the median worker's real hourly compensation grew 10.7%. 10.7 versus 80. That's a big divergence. So basically the question is, why didn't people earn more? And I think what's really important about this is it tells people that it wasn't that the economy couldn't provide more. There's been this long-term stagnation.
The pie kept growing.
The pie was there. We have not been broke.
Yeah.
Employers have not been broke. The economy has not been broke. It just hasn't been getting to the typical worker.
Okay.
And in fact, I can tell you that I think that's what we're facing in the next 30 years. We will not be broke in the next 30 years. The only question before us is, will we have policies that actually make us have that income that's generated get to the typical working family?
So if the 3 decades or so, 3 or 4 decades in the post-World War II period where productivity and median compensation kind of grew in lockstep, as we see in figure 1, and then they diverged 80% on productivity, 11% on median comp. Can you talk a little bit about what explains that divergence? I mean, you could say it's inequality or the growth didn't go there. Why not? Can you hold forth a little bit on what explains that divergence?
Well, as you mentioned, the title is The Wedges Between Productivity.
Yeah, so what are the wedges?
What are the wedges?
Right,
right. Well, there's 3 wedges, 2 easy to understand and 1 not so easy to understand. One wedge is that there's a growth of compensation, wages and benefits but that has grown more unequal. So the median worker has not been gaining as fast compensation growth as was available because high wage workers were gaining much, much more. Two, much more of our income has been going to income accruing to wealth rather than labor income.
Is that like capital gains?
Capital gains, interest income, dividends, rent, things like that. And that has actually happened extraordinarily in the last 10 years. And that's something to talk about too. Right now, the share of income going to wealth is greater than at any time since the 1940s when we were at war and we had a war labor board which consciously suppressed wage growth. So we have the distribution of income to people with wealth that's the same as if we had a policy of absolutely suppressing wage growth.
And you said there was a third, which is a technical thing having to do with prices. We won't get into that. People can read about that in the paper. It's not.
Well, let me just say that of these, the 2/3 of the divergence is due to the inequality between labor and capital, you might say, and the inequality of compensation income. And if those things didn't occur, the rising inequality of compensation and the shift from labor to capital income, the 10.7% growth in median compensation would have been more like 55%.
Interesting.
So it's basically like a 45%
huge effect.
Huge penalty to the typical worker.
Okay. If I look at your table 1 where you kind of decompose all these factors you've just described, if we look over the full period, just like you said, the inequality of compensation, the fact that more growth in compensation went to the top and not the middle and down, explains 50% of the divergence, about 47% of the divergence over this whole period. But then there's something I noticed. If you go back to the latter half of the 1990s, there's a period there where labor share of income actually grows. So the labor share of income actually grows, and this wedge, that particular wedge wasn't so active right then, and the median person did better. Now that was a period of very low unemployment, full employment. What role does full employment play in both the early years when things were when compensation and productivity grew together, and the later years when they didn't? That number I just cited suggests that it's important.
Well, I guess I just have to tell you about a book I read by Jared Bernstein and Dean Baker, which basically pointed this out. You know, that in the late 1990s, there was an acceleration of productivity growth, which created the possibilities of greater income. And what really allowed the income to pass on to more people was the fact that there was persistent low unemployment.
Right.
There were some hikes in the minimum wage. You know, individuals had some bargaining power.
So let's just stop on that word before we finish. Bargaining power seems to be an important part of the story, and it's something that a lot of economists don't talk about, but I know it's at the heart of your view of how the benefits of growth often get divided. And full employment, tight labor markets improve the bargaining power of workers who in other times aren't able to claim what I would consider more their fair share. Is that kind of somewhere embedded in all of this?
Absolutely. I just looked up an old article from the Wall Street Journal from the year 2000, which was about how employers were starting to hire ex-cons, felony ex-cons, all over the country. And this is a really important thing. When unemployment is low, everybody gets involved. Anybody who wants a job has a job. If the employer isn't treating you right, you get another job. And I think that actually speaks to some of the issues we're seeing today, because some people are saying that the high unemployment is going to make people disappear, you know, and we talk about they may lose their skills, et cetera, like that. I think we have to address today's persistent high unemployment. But I don't really believe that people that have been unemployed for a couple of years can't get into the labor market again, because if ex-felons could get jobs in the year 2000,
so a lot of this,
anybody who had a job 2 years ago can get a job if we had unemployment down and stayed low.
If demand were strong enough,
absolutely,
it would change a lot.
This growth in the
Say a little bit more about some of the structural factors behind this divergence between productivity and wage growth.
Well, what is behind that growth of inequality of compensation? On the one hand, it's the top 1% pulling away from everybody else. And we know that that's basically the very high pay of CEOs and other managerial workers. And it's the financialization of the economy, the expansion of the financial sector, and the very high pay.
Talking about the banks?
The banks, Wall Street, all that sort of stuff. The fact that those people get a lot more of the money, and a lot of the people there are very high paid. So that's fueling the growth of the 1% of wage earners versus everybody else. We also see the people at the bottom fell down relative to other people, at least in the 1980s, because of the weakness of the minimum wage in that period and the high unemployment of the 1980s. But what the inequality that's kept on going, as you know, Jared, is the gap between people at the top and the middle. And that is an ongoing process that's from the deregulation of industries, telecommunications, transportation. It's the ongoing pressure from international trade on middle-class workers. It's the weakening of unions, no longer really being able to represent the people in the middle as much anymore, and unemployment at various times. So we've seen that kind of growth go on forever, and it's not because people don't have the right skills, in my view. That's a topic for another day. It's not that
Well, it's something we talk a lot about on my blog, which is the idea that the notion that what's holding us back is a skills mismatch. Not a lot of evidence for that. I mean, either now or even in the longer term. Not that it doesn't exist somewhere at sometimes some markets, but not a big part of the story in your view?
I mean, employers need many more skilled workers than they needed in the past, but they're getting many more skilled workers. And what's happening is a structural imbalance of power that's grown tremendously, especially in recent years. And if we don't address that, then the income growth in the future will be like that in the past. And I don't think we're going to have a good macroeconomy either.
So look, you've got a very deep and I think trenchant diagnosis of the structural problems. Can you say a little bit about policy solutions?
Well, I think we have to have economic policy as if the quality of jobs matters, right? What people get in benefits, what they get in wages, and that should be the priority. So that might mean, making sure that everyone has economic security through a universal pension system. It means making sure that everyone has health care provided. Right now, employer-provided health care is going down and down.
Yeah.
If we lose the health care reform, that's going to get more and more and more worse. That's going to get worse. We need a minimum wage that is set so that people on the minimum wage are earning half of what a typical worker makes. We need to find a way to revitalize the labor movement. We need to find a way that globalization puts less downward pressure on middle wage workers, helps us rebuild manufacturing. And I think
you mentioned financialization as a part of the problem. Is there something in financial regulation?
I think a good financial transaction tax to help shrink the sector, would be very good. I think one of the guiding lights is we need to think about labor standards, setting a wage floor, setting something so that people can't be pushed down so far, and that could involve paid vacations, it could involve sick leave, it involves the minimum wage, it involves making sure everyone has health and pension. Those are the kind of things that make sure that as we see productivity growth go up, everybody is going to share in it.
That's a great place to stop. Those are the kinds of anti-wedge policies that might help bring those lines back together once again, right?
We know what to do, OTEers. We just need the politics and the policy.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks very much, and we'll see you back here at OTE real soon.